Hey everyone, you are listening to The Aniston Anthony Show. On this podcast, I talk to you about personal finances, personal development, and how to grow in life and life in general. The episode begins. Have you ever started to read a book at midway you realize that this book is just not for you? Since you have invested so much of your time reading this book, you just don't want to skip this book. You think of finishing this book, but why? Even though you no longer like to read any further, you just keep on reading. Let me get into your perspective. I have invested a lot of my time reading till here, and I don't want to waste those invested time. And I just don't want to skip this book. I would rather keep reading this book even though I know I don't like it. Let's take another example. Let me bring an example of IT company. Suppose there's an on-site requirement and your manager has to choose between you and, let's say, Suresh. Clearly, you are the experienced one, but the manager chooses Suresh over you. As you know, there are a lot of formalities to be done by the manager regarding visa, relieving letters, and so on. For this, a considerable amount of manager's time and effort is taken. But when Suresh lands in the client's place on site, clearly the client isn't happy with Suresh's performance. The manager thinks he has specifically chosen the guy, so he doesn't want to disappoint the client either. So he spends more time, more budget of the company's money to train Suresh on the domain. After months of training, the client isn't happy anymore with Suresh. Putting more efforts to keep Suresh there, the manager sacrifices more of his time to save his reputation as a manager. But with all the time and efforts wasted, Suresh is finally called back to the base location. Take a moment and think about what has just happened. Clearly, there was an emotional attachment to keeping Suresh there by the manager. Even though the manager knew Suresh wasn't performing enough, he kept him there and upon that invested a lot of his money and time on him to keep him there again and again. The amount of time and money invested by the manager to keep Suresh there on site is the cost. That cost is called the sunk cost. Even though the manager knew Suresh wasn't performing enough, he kept on investing his time and money. This situation, this scenario, this is called sunk cost fallacy. Let me take you to a business perspective. Suppose you have started your own business. It's been a year running, and throughout the year, you have invested your time, money, and effort. But the business isn't going as planned. It isn't generating any profit. And you, on the other hand, is putting your time, energy, and effort to run this business. At all cost, you want to run the business, even though at the back of your mind you know it isn't generating any profit. There are two scenarios here: hoping that the business will turn around and start generating revenue, or the business can go bankrupt and close down. See here, the first option is of hope. That is what most of us do. In doing so, we again and again invest our time and money, that hoping one day it might turn around. In this scenario, the invested time and money is the sunk cost, and your hope that the business will turn around is a fallacy. That's sunk cost fallacy. Let me give you a few more examples so that you'll start to see where the sunk cost fallacy is actually happening in real life. People spend 10 to 15 years in a career that is not going anywhere, but people still stick around because they don't want their past 10 to 15 years of experience to go in vain. Suppose you are in a bad relationship for 3 years, but you still want to be around in the hope that things will work out in the future. Imagine you are going to a store and halfway you realize, oh wait, the store is actually closed today. But you figure I have already come halfway. I might as well go all the way to the store to check out so that my halfway of riding wouldn't have to be wasted. Suppose you brought a 10,000 rupees plane ticket and a day before you fell sick, really sick in your stomach. Now you are thinking not to take flight, but the ticket isn't refundable and you have already spent a lot on the ticket. So you eventually take the flight of 10 miserable hours when you could have just booked another flight a day after. Let's say you're watching a really horrible movie, but you are already 30 minutes into it and you think you might as well keep watching the movie till the end. You keep watching because you don't want to feel like those initial 30 minutes are put to waste. Let me bring this into a perspective of finance. That's where all the human emotions like greed and fear come into place. That's where people actually start to act weirdly. That's where people panic. That's where people become happy, afraid. All the thoughts come into picture. All right. Let's take an example of the stock called Geetanjali. It's a jewelry store where they make diamonds, gems, and all. Suppose you have invested in Geetanjali at rupees 80 in 2018. This stock has gone down to 2 rupees as of 2020. A whopping 98% loss in your capital in 2 years. Now trading around 2 rupees, you think I should buy more shares of Geetanjali in order to bring down my average and hoping the share price to move up one day. Should I buy again 2 lakhs, 3 lakhs or 10 lakhs rupees worth of shares? But what you need to focus on here is the idea that what if you were never invested in Geetanjali itself? Knowing what you know about the company right now, would you invest in Geetanjali gems? The answer will most probably be no. But what about the initial losses from my first investment? We need to realize every new rupee put into the stock market is independent of the previous investment. The investment which you do when Geetanjali is at 2 rupees is independent of the investment which you have done when Geetanjali was at 80. Just a tip here, whenever you start to invest in a share or anywhere, just make a price as a target where you are going to come out. Suppose in the case of Geetanjali, if you had invested in 80 rupees, you need to set a stop loss, which we say in trading, that below a particular price, I am going to sell all my shares. In the case of Geetanjali, you have invested in 80 rupees. You should have had a mindset that if the share price falls below 70 or maybe 60, you are going to come out of this investment. There's no point holding a share from 80 rupees, 2 rupees. As of this podcast, the real life example you can see is Yes Bank. From a whopping 400 rupees, it has fallen to 13 rupees, and still people hold it, hoping that one day Yes Bank will zoom back to 400 rupees or at least 200, 300 rupees so that they can take their profit back. What happens here is our brains rationalize the sunk cost and move forward, even though we know we wouldn't get back our invested time and money. Part of the reason why humans do not accept sunk cost is loss aversion. By the definition, loss aversion is a tendency for humans to avoid loss whenever possible because they don't like it. So, when faced with the possibility of losing sunk cost, our brains naturally want to avoid that as much as possible. The sunk cost fallacy makes it difficult for us to quit something we feel we are too invested in, especially since we might think we are losing something because of it. However, it is better to accept our losses and move on, as you will never recover the true value of something once it is gone. Life is full of sunk cost. It is best to recognize them and not let them bring you down. I hope you have found this episode useful. Try to share this episode to the people who needs to listen to this. I'll catch you up in the next episode. Goodbye.